So the second part, the second kind of episode of this novel, and I do see it very much in kind of 3 episodes, is kind of as Janie leaves her first husband and goes off with Joe Starks. Now, her first husband was always kind of, he criticizes her for her independence, very specifically for her independence. At one point he says, you would think you were white folk by the way that you act. And she's kind of like, why is that a bad thing to be independent, to act? What is it to act like white folk? But, you know, she acts entitled in some way, and she does feel entitled. And so Joe comes along, and he sort of says right at the first time that he is dressed opulently. He has got this sort of lovely silk shirt, and he looks great. He looks like opportunity, and he says, well, I've been working for white folk all my life. I hear there's a black town starting up, and I'm gonna come along. And he takes and he woos Janie very, very quickly. They have eyes for each other. They like each other a lot. And she tries to talk to her to Kilix, to the first husband, and he ain't no good. He isn't listening to her. He's reiterating this. No, Janie, you need to learn your place. And she goes, okay, this isn't my place. I'm going off with Joe. So she just gets up and leaves him. There is no, she doesn't even properly tell him that she says one day maybe I'm going to disappear. But there's no kind of leaving. There's certainly no divorce. There's certainly no end of that marriage. She just goes off with Joe. And they get married, and they come to Eatonville. And Joe, the first thing that he does is like, where's the mayor? He's called Joe, and sometimes he's called Jody. She mostly calls him Jody, but he's Joe Starks is his name. They arrive at the town, and he straight away looks for the most important person that he can find, and they're like, well, we don't actually have a mayor yet. And so Joe essentially makes himself the mayor and puts the pair of them in a very impressive cultural position. He gets money. He's a good businessman. Joe is kind of the representation of capitalism, of the American dream, of the work hard and you can make yourself something. He's the one who tells Janie, oh, you've no business behind a plow. No, you should be something great. But what... And for a while, for a little while, this really looks like the answer. This looks fantastic. Those first sort of chapter of this life kind of looks like, wow, look at them. They're having a wonderful time. They're improving. They're going up in the world. And Janie is so incredibly beautiful. She is really strikingly beautiful. And kind of the other men in the town really admire her. And she and Joe set up this shop. They buy lots of land. He becomes the mayor, and they're establishing themselves in a position of power. They are respected. They are admired. But what is missing in this life, and very quickly it starts to go sour. For Janie, is that she's essentially a trophy wife at this point. There's one point she's in the shop, and we actually get quite a bit of Joe's narrative. And this is where we can kind of start to say, well, whose narrative is this? Because we are hearing Joe's thoughts in a way that Janie doesn't directly know them, but perhaps she is guessing at them. Perhaps this is kind of Phoebe's inference. Perhaps this is the town as a whole speculating on how this story must have been. But we see Joe seeing Janie in her kind of beautiful long hair, and she has this kind of very striking long hair. And she's wandering around the shops and around the shop, and the other men there are admiring her. And Joe suddenly feels threatened by that. And then we see his possessiveness, and he says, oh no, she's got to tie up her hair, because that hair is for me and it's not for other men. And we get on to sort of chapter 6. We really see their relationship starting to disintegrate. And what I think is a really nice moment for Janie is her own personal disillusion with Joe. So if you have a look at chapter 6, this is actually quite a long way through chapter 6. Actually, the thing to do is go to chapter 7 and go a couple of pages back. So it's page 72 in my edition. It's kind of before there's a last there's a last kind of conversation in the shop at the end of this chapter. And the paragraph I want to look at begins, Janey stood where he left her for an unmeasured time and thought. Because Joe is becoming threatened by Janey. He starts to kind of make fun of her in the shop, and just calls her an old woman, and she just said, well, I'm not as old and as fat as you are. Is literally what she said, and she makes all the other men laugh at him. In this kind of this one moment of defiance, she stands up to him and goes, no, you don't get to talk at me that way. You don't get to show your power over me. And he really starts to hate her. Well, he's interesting actually. There is a direct line where it says he didn't hate her, but he wanted her to think he did, which really shows how Joe is all about appearances. He gets his own personal esteem, his own personal kind of feeling of happiness by judging how other people think of him, or how other people are looking at him. What happens here is actually that she just cooks a bad meal and then he hits her. And at this moment, she has this disillusion. This paragraph is wonderful. She stood there. He's left. He's hit her. He slapped her. For making a bad dinner, like nothing real. And I think the point is that all of these kind of minor, all the minor things. This isn't a kind of a great tragic moment in itself. What it is just that it's just the realization that this isn't where she should be. Janey stood where he had left her for an unmeasured time and thought. She stood there until something fell off the shelf inside her. Then she went inside to see what it was. It was her image of Jodie, tumbled down and shattered. But looking at it, she saw that it never was the flesh and blood figure of her dreams, just something she had grabbed up to drape her dreams over. The imagery there is just gorgeous. So something falls off a shelf inside of her, so she goes inside of herself. Something changes within her. She goes inside herself to look at it. This sort of wonderful self-examination. She says, okay, what am I feeling right now? And she realizes, one, that her image of Jodie is shattered. So all the things that she's thought about him that are wonderful are just gone. But also that it isn't the thing in itself. Jodie was just a shape. Sorry, I'm just trying to... It was something she had grabbed. It wasn't her dreams. It was just something she had grabbed to drape her dreams over. And that makes a lot of sense when we think about where she was with Killix and the fact that Joe is the first charming young man to come down the road when she's in this miserable marriage, just kind of standing at the end of the gate every day, and then this handsome young man walks along. Amazingly, that's not actually how you build true love. It's just grab the first person that you see. And this paragraph goes on to talk about to go back to the imagery of the pear tree, peach tree. I've already forgotten what it was. The fruit tree. She had no more blossomy openings, dusting pollen over her man. Neither any glistening young fruit where the petals used to be. And she realizes that he doesn't know her. She had a host of thoughts she had never expressed to him, and numerous emotions she had never let Jodie know about. So she's been keeping all of these things inside, and she's not going to do that anymore. Now, it's difficult for her to leave. She can't just walk away from him in the way that she could. She's older now. She has this position of respect. and she kind of falls into this, she falls into the role of being the mayor's wife, of being beautiful and being quiet. And the opening line of chapter 7, the years took all the fight out of Janie's face. For a while she thought it was gone from her soul. So we really feel like there's nothing here, but I mean, even in the language here, for a while she thought it was gone from her soul. We from the perspective that we have, know, you know, as people who are somehow hearing about this after it's all happened, we know she's not gonna, the fight isn't gone. We know from the phrasing here that things are going to change. Now, what happens here, and it's actually around this point that Phoebe kind of comes into the narrative as a character, when somebody go, oh hey, it's you. She's just here as Janie's friends, as Janie's friend, and so there's a kind of weirdness of, oh, is Janie now telling Phoebe about that conversation that they had all that time then? There's no acknowledgement in the narrative that is, you know, we don't have any of Janie saying, hey, remember that? But we just start to kind of shade in, oh, this is where we are. This is where Phoebe kind of comes into her story originally. And Joe simply gets sick and dies. There's so much death in this novel. There is so much death in life, and there is an expectation of Joe's bride that she's going to suffer and she's going to be sad and she's going to stand there and mourn. And again, this rejection, this easy rejection of social mores, you know, Phoebe kind of tells her, you can't be saying things like this. You can't be, you know, Janie says that she feels quite liberated after Joe dies. And, you know, Phoebe's saying you can't say that. And Janie says, well, grieving shouldn't last, mourning shouldn't last longer than grieving. I'm not just gonna play the role. I'm not gonna do what people want me to, which I think is, you know, why Janie has been such a revered character in recent years, because, you know, she's a really remarkable feminist icon, really, for a character that comes out of a novel written in the 1930s. And so our kind of final section, she doesn't do what she ought to. She doesn't do, she isn't the respectable mayor's wife grieving. She meets young Tea Cake and just takes off with him too. So we'll have our final section on Tea Cake in the final part of the novel. That brings us to the title as well.